Welcome back to the Sovereignty Studios show. My name is Michael Ruiz.
And I'm Jordan Herbs.
And today we got a special guest on, a returning guest, Mr. Eric V. Stacks. Welcome, fresh off his trip.
Fresh off the boat.
Yeah.
To El Salvador.
To El Salvador. Welcome, dude.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Pumped to be here.
Yes.
Land of freedom and opportunity, except for if you're a murderous gang member, which we don't want them anyways.
How long are you here for?
Until December 4th.
And what's the intention of the trip? Obviously adopting Bitcoin.
Yep. Conference, be a part of your retreat. Pumped for what you guys are doing. That and exploring the area. My wife and I are considering moving down here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So how long is this trip for?
Until December 4th, we're going to go back home. We'll be back, I don't know, sometime around Christmas. And I'll stay all the way through January. If a place comes up that we like, we'll probably lease a house here.
Really nice.
Yeah.
Are you here to kind of get a feel of things?
Yeah, well, this is our third time here for the year, so we kind of have a little bit of a general feel. The energy is inspiring. What's taking place is pretty cool, honestly. And me personally, I've come to a place in my life where I'm embarking on a new chapter. My contract at the greenhouse facility that I've been running has come to an end. So I'm a free agent, as I say it. So I'm available for new life experiences, a new chapter in life.
Well, it's freaking good to have you here and part of the, I guess, ecosystem and community that's being built out of Bitcoiners and just generally out of the box free thinkers and intellectuals and all of that that's transpiring over here in El Salvador.
So you've been traveling a lot this year, mostly to Bitcoin events.
It's been all for Bitcoin events.
And so how does El Salvador compare to these other places as far as what's happening?
El Salvador has been the most fun place that we've been to so far. I really enjoyed going to Madeira. Madeira was a really cool event. I think that place was, I don't know, had a positive vibe. The conference was really cool. But there's something interesting, and it's hard to describe about what's happening here. When I got here for the halving party, my wife and I were driving through the countryside on the way to the resort. And it was interesting. Right out of the gate, it was like, this is wild. I mean, I could feel myself living here. I don't know exactly why, but it has this raw, undeveloped, wild side to it. It's very, very different, but somewhat similar to how Humboldt County was 15 years ago. It's just, it's raw. There's so much economic activity and energy taking place. Like it's contagious. It's alluring. Like, you know,
Does it feel like a country on the rise to you?
oh yeah, definitely. The development, I was looking at Google Maps after we got our Airbnb for the month and looking at the maps and then looking at the neighborhood afterwards. I'm like, dude, half of the houses must have been built in the last 24 months. I don't know how old the satellite imagery was, but it's incredible.
Yeah, I noticed that the other day too, especially on the beach area.
Yeah.
Like they didn't have the gas station that was there. They didn't have a lot of the development that's now there wasn't in the Google Maps satellite photo.
It'd be an interesting like online art project, or maybe someone's already done this, but like to see the gradual development of a place like this through Google Maps,
Yeah.
through Google Earth.
Yeah, man. El Salvador, you know, it seems to me like the logical alternative especially for Bitcoiners, but for anyone wanting to like get out of the clown world and have like fresh, fertile ground to build on and to plant roots in. It seems like the trajectory that El Salvador's on right now with sound government and sound monetary policy, or with the adoption of Bitcoin, it just seems like a no-brainer that this trajectory is going to eventually lead to prosperity, right? God willing, any other black swans or anything like that.
Totally. I guess this is a question. I heard the other day that the inflation rate in dollar terms here is 1%. Have you heard that? Is that accurate?
Not 100% sure. So I didn't hear that. No.
Yeah, I did hear that, which is pretty interesting. Maybe
But it makes sense to me though, because El Salvador imports a lot of their stuff, and if inflation is being felt kind of worldwide, especially within the supply chains, it would seem to me that would have an impact over here, a bigger impact here, especially with all the transportation costs and everything like that go into importing food, I would imagine that prices are just getting higher here.
Would that mean inflation is less than it should be?
Yeah, I would imagine that that's because, I mean, if that's true, I would imagine that that's because the amount of goods and services is increasing
Relative to demand.
well at a fast enough rate relative to the amount of monetary units that are getting injected into the marketplace. And so El Salvador is not printing US dollars. The United States is. And so the amount of dollars coming into the area has to be coming in from people who are new to the area, bringing in their capital.
The inflation rate in El Salvador for 2024 drops to 0.58. Can you scroll down, Matt? What does 0.58 mean? Or do you know, Eric?
And what do they mean by
0.58%, so less than 1%.
Yeah, and I don't know how they measure what their CPI is. How
So
they
when we're
measure
talking about
but-
inflation, we're talking about price inflation, right? Right? Like
Yeah.
It can't be dollar inflation, can
Yeah.
it? I mean, that's happening anyway.
Yes.
I mean, that's just going to be the cost of goods and services increasing, but it depends on what goods and services that they're measuring. And then in the United States, they keep decreasing the size of the, square footage that you need to live in. They take out steak, they put in ground beef. Next thing you know, it's Beyond Burgers. And so it's a manipulated metric. And I don't know how manipulated that metric is or isn't.
Right.
Yeah. It sounds kind of suspect to me, but
Yeah.
who knows?
So today's a big day because we might experience a new all-time high against Bitcoin. We don't have a wide angle set up today, but we're staring at the chart here, and there's a good chance. Well, we're less than $500 away. So
It's a new all-time high watch party.
yeah, it might happen live on this show.
Yeah.
Yeah. To be honest, I'm surprised that it's taken this long to get back here. Yeah, it's been interesting watching all of these coins get dumped onto the market and the price stays sideways. Like the buying has been incredible all year long. I think it's Germany's sold 50,000 coins. I think Mt. Gox dumped a bunch of coins, or they released coins back to their holders. So in some sense, I don't know who the sellers beyond that have been this year, but I don't know. This is a welcomed.
It seems
time
like
frame.
the buyers of those coins are really big players with deep capital pockets. Because to absorb that, right? For the market to absorb that,
Totally.
it probably would. Yeah. I don't think retail could have just absorbed that on its own. So yeah, it's interesting. I think that all these governments are now revealing that they have whole mining operations in Bitcoin. That's a cool thing about decentralized global network that's permissionless, that anyone can participate in. It's like all of a sudden you get these surprises as far as who's involved and how much infrastructure they've already developed around Bitcoin
Without anyone knowing.
without anyone knowing.
I think what's cool about, like, when we were around this price back in April, I guess it takes a few, I'm like 3 bull runs in now, right? So it's like, it takes a while to fully grasp and comprehend price action. Cause like back in April, it was jumping pretty fast, right? But it's like we sideways for so long, lots of consolidation, and now we're slowly inching up. And that's how I think it's sustainable. Like it's more real. It's not just an artificial pump like we saw kind of in April. Cause like we got to 73 or whatever from 65 from 60 in the matter of like a week. And here we are, we're like slowly trudging along from 60 now for 2 weeks? When were we at 60? Not long ago.
Here's the thing. I think this is all, I don't know what it all is, right? What's my opinion? But I think the election has a lot to do with it. And so maybe this is the markets like forecasting a Trump win and inching the way up,
Man.
And then, if Kamala wins, be prepared for a candle straight downward. And if Trump wins, I'd be prepared for a God candle.
So did you watch the Donald Trump, Joe Rogan?
I did.
Yeah. What did you think of it?
He didn't say anything that, I don't know, riveting in particular, but it was good listening to him go on for 3 hours straight. Like the thing that the entire time I'm just thinking, I don't think that Kamala could do this without saying something that would be absolutely catastrophic.
And Kamala's not in her 80s either.
Right.
This was also
Is Trump 80?
I think he's 82. I could be wrong.
That's
about
pretty
that.
crazy. You think I was sitting down for
Yeah.
3 hours and having a coherent conversation in your 80s? My grandparents were all like kind of gone by then.
Totally.
Mentally.
Yeah, he's pretty sharp. It was a good conversation for sure. I think that conversation had a lot. I think it'll have a big impact on, pushing him over the edge. In some sense, though, I've been saying this. I've been thinking a lot about it. Like, I'll be shocked if he doesn't win, but at the same time, I'll be surprised if he does. Like, does that make sense? Like the level of pushback and the aversion against him amongst some of the very powerful entities is, and honestly, over the years, it's made me like him more. It's like, wait, if all of these vested interests and these powerful people have such an aversion to this individual,
there must be something there.
Maybe he's a real threat to all the scumbaggery taking place.
Well, we talk about the Clown World show often, and I just got to admit, this last few weeks, like watching the Trump campaign and also watching the Harris campaign and watching the whole thing play out, I'm kind of getting more and more sold on Trump. And I hate to say this, like I don't want to play into it, but watching this coalition of like Tulsi Gabbard and Kennedy and Elon Musk and all Tony Hinchcliffe showing up at the rally, but watching all this and like seeing what they all stand for, it's all these people pretty much against this kind of corrupt progressivism that's taking over the world, woke, whatever we want to call it.
Sure.
And hang on, I'm going to finish my point. Like watching it all, I'm like, wow. And then watching him on Joe Rogan and hearing him say like, yeah, I hired the wrong guys. I put bad people in there. I didn't know what I was doing. And like, yeah, I've always wanted to hear him talk about that because he all talked about draining the swamp and he put Bolton in and like all these warmongers in the office. Like, what are you doing, Trump? And then maybe this is just a play on his campaign, and maybe they're just doing a good job. And like I'm saying, they're reeling me in. But like he said the right things on that show for someone like me to be like, oh, cool, he's acknowledging that. Oh, cool, he's mentioning that. And like now, as someone who tries to stay out of this whole thing, now I'm like kind of rooting for Trump, even though I'm not going to vote and I don't want to like play into it. But the campaign's doing a good job.
Yeah, I think the campaign's doing a good job. I think Trump is a master marketer. I'm not sold at all as Trump as a leader, especially of the free world. I think that his track record is absolutely horrific, if not downright the most tyranny that any of us have ever experienced was on his watch, where he locked America down. And I think so many people have forgotten that. And he went on Joe Rogan, and from what I can tell, all softball questions, nothing amazing, right? Like no new insights or anything like that. He just showed that he's a human and going to have a conversation for 3 hours. But where's the question of like, hey man, you pushed Operation Warp Speed. Like, do you have any type of,
that was off limits.
Yeah.
Conversation.
do you have any type of remorse? What would you do differently? Like I think that so many people are caught up in this hype because I think, like you mentioned, there's the progressive left is so like wild and unhinged that people are like, no, we need some semblance of sanity. And so Trump has positioned himself there as the anti-woke candidate who's going to make everything right. But in my opinion, he still doesn't really deserve to even be considered based off his previous presidency,
Sure, but he's already there, and then it just becomes the usual question, the lesser of two evils.
Yeah,
totally. And outside of the pandemic, I think that a lot of the things that he's attempting to do are good. He wants to deregulate. He wants to bring a bunch of the
tariffs.
Tariffs, bring the production back to the States. I think those things are good. I will say, it's funny. It's one of those things where it's like, you feel like you have this a little bit too, where they're like, I feel like I shouldn't say that I like him. There's a big aversion to it, but I kind of like him a little bit. I will say that. And as far as a leader though, I think we have a element of hate the game, not the player. Like this guy's a winner. He's a winner, and the world is full of a bunch of shitty people and a bunch of bad things. And so somebody who's been able to navigate through the business world as successfully as he has, I think he can do good things for the country. The government is a business, and this guy has a track record of winning. People hate on Larry Fink. Larry Fink's a winner. He might be doing things behind the scenes, whatever. But as far as his business tactics, like he's done the ultimate job at leveraging the things in the system in which he was operating in. And then the game changed. Stage left, 2009, boom, comes in, Bitcoin, Satoshi releases the white paper. 15 years later, Larry Fink is on the Bitcoin train. So he's pivoted. He's continuing to win as far as I can tell. And I think Trump is going to do a similar thing. And I think once again, I'm grading on a curve and I'm so Bitcoin focused. I think Bitcoin or Trump is significantly better for Bitcoin than Kamala is. Now that he's got Kennedy, that's a big deal. And I was just recently in Santa Monica and I had the privilege of having 2 hours of conversation in and out of groups of people with Jason Lowry. If Trump wins, Jason Lowry is going to be appointed to the White House. Well, it looks like he'll be appointed to the White House.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the probability that we start mining Bitcoin and we have a hash force increases significantly if we have Trump in office.
Well, and that's what I'm saying.
Let me ask you something real quick. Now, if Trump wins, does that kind of make staying in America or make it more appealing?
No, not necessarily, but I do think that the degradation to the culture is in the economic viability of the United States might change. I don't know. I saw something too. I don't know. This could be totally wrong, but I saw a post yesterday. Trump's talking about abolishing
income tax.
Yeah.
And for the tariffs. Yeah.
Okay.
Because that's how it was before.
For tariffs?
Well, because tariffs, like, how do tariffs work, right? They're taxes for the goods coming in, goods going out, essentially. That's how the country used to fund itself, more or less.
Well, and then sales tax, we pay a shitload in sales tax.
Yeah, but income tax, I mean, a lot of states don't even have it still.
Yeah.
Right? Income tax was something new, essentially.
Well, it's slavery. It's like a slave system.
Sure.
Right?
And it came after the Federal Reserve, another slave system tool.
But the system responsible for the violation of property rights and the debasement of the currency has enslaved itself through like hard forking reality in a sense by debasing the currency beyond what hard asset it had on reserve. So I don't necessarily know. And like, I used to think that there was like these, okay, so it's two things. I think that there are some diabolical forces at play in our civilization, clearly. However, it's a bunch of individuals serving their self-interest. And I say this sometimes, like the government and politicians treat the government like a rental car. They get in there, they just beat the shit out of it. They beat the shit out of it. They get what they can for them and theirs, and then they pass it on to the next guy. And so I think that a lot of the things that we have is just a runaway train. I think it's a runaway train, and it's creating this feedback loop. As the government debases the currency, they're increasing their own cost of operating. As they mint new currency into existence, they spin it into the marketplace, and so the next year, what it costs to operate their business,
they're putting themselves in
increases.
A rock and a hard place too, because they're beholden to the interest rates, right? And they're being buyers of the bonds, and they can just blow themselves up.
Can we go back to Trump for a second? Hang on. I just had a thought. I just wanted to share this earlier. It's like, okay, say what we will about Trump and his track record. I'm all, yeah, for sure. But look at this time. Look at the people he's surrounding himself with. And let's just give everyone the benefit of the doubt, right? Let's give everyone the benefit of the doubt here. Elon Musk. Say what we will about Elon Musk, but like, there's real journalism on X now. You can get stories you don't get anywhere else. Okay. Like, we can't like refute that, right? Even if Elon Musk has a huge hidden, what's it called? Techno-human agenda, like horrible shit, whatever. We have this free speech thing on X, and we're all learning information now that we wouldn't without it. RFK says, make America healthy again, all this stuff. Let's take him at his word. Who else? Jason Lowry. We read the book. We have an idea of who Jason Lowry is, what his values are, what he stands for. If he's going into the office, like, you look at that and it kind of, makes you want to trust the Trump train a little more because of those people around him, which he didn't have last time.
Yeah. I thought about this yesterday. I have a lot of friends that are convinced that Trump is the answer that we've been looking for in America to all the problems that we're facing. And I'm not convinced. And I already stated my case on here. And I was like, man, should I put some coin on this? Just like, what would be the litmus test for that, right? Like, cave into the globalist again and just go along with their agenda. What would it be?
I don't know if Trump's a globalist necessarily. I've been saying this for a while. I think that Trump is much more nationalistic, and the opposing parties have been much more globalistic. And also, I think it's really easy to become super ideological. Trump is not a Bukele, clearly. But I think it's moving in the right direction.
Maybe I'm just bitter from experiencing the most tyranny
and the last
that
thing
I've ever experienced under his watch.
The last thing I want to do is defend Trump, but look, Bukele did lockdowns too. Bukele had forced vaccinations too. Like, all this shit happened, and no one knew any better.
People were scared. Yeah.
You know, that fucking scam was fucking deep. You know, people didn't have the right information to make good decisions.
And so
Yeah, but here's the thing. Okay, I'll give you that. But as we can see, there's a whole movement over here to detach themselves from the WHO, to admit their mistakes. They passed out ivermectin. They followed the science over here and all of that. Where Trump, there's no remorse. There's no even acknowledgement of his mistakes. You know, this part where you said that, oh, he said, yeah, you know, I messed
You know
up.
where the acknowledgement comes in?
Where's
of
that?
that shit? RFK being appointed to whatever health
Totally.
office.
Interesting.
yeah,
That's
Trump.
what RFK is all about.
So is it to maintain an image?
Maybe, but by everyone knows what RFK stands for. We all
Okay,
heard
so
his campaign.
can I just summarize then your positions, right? Because we all experience the same tyranny, and you and I'm not as forgiving as you guys, obviously. So your position is that, hey, Trump made some mistakes. He realizes them now. He's surrounding himself with good people, and even though he can't admit his mistakes, you can tell he's trying to like make amends for it based on the people that he's now surrounding himself by. Is that kind of your argument?
That would be the argument, I guess, we're positing here. I mean, I'm not saying Trump. I don't believe Trump is going to save everything. RFK is also a big Bitcoiner, right? You heard him with Breedlove and stuff, you know, and not that he would be in any money thing. Like, has Trump talked about who would be appointed to like chairman of the Fed and stuff and these things?
I don't know. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
those are the real things, right? So I don't believe Trump is a savior. Maybe it'll elongate certain aspects of the culture and economy, like you're saying, that we would prefer not to be deteriorated so quickly. But like, if we just look at that team, we look at all those people, we look at what they say, and we
I mean, I could buy that argument. I like that's why I'm asking it, because I can understand that position.
yeah. I mean, I was in Argentina in 2020. So I don't know what it was like with Trump there. I got back when Biden was in office, and California was freaking horrible. So I don't know if that was just carryover or because Biden won. So I can't really speak to like what you experienced in Florida and in 2020 while Trump was in charge. But yeah, I mean, I think we got to also have some
For sure.
forgiveness for people just being human and making mistakes also. Was it nefarious? Trump, I think it was just incompetence. The whole COVID thing.
So if it's the pandemic, the big, I don't know, as far as I could tell, the reason for the pandemic would be to inject, I don't know, trillions of dollars into the system to keep the system solvent. And if Trump is truly not part of the cabal, then maybe he is not privy to those things. And, you know, I think his hand is forced a little bit too, though. There's people behind the scenes for sure. And you got the central bankers, you got the Federal Reserve. So there's only so much he can do. And I'm not like, you know, an advocate of Trump to the fullest, but I think that I think that most people should. I think everybody should vote for Trump, because I think that's a much better direction for the country than Kamala is. But I look at it like it's not. You know, it's really easy, like I said, to get ideological. But I think that at the very least, and for the most part, if we have Trump, we're going to be moving in the right direction. Like clearly, we're not moving in the right direction. And in the last 4 years, things have been pretty bad. Now, as far as like the tyranny with the lockdowns, I mean, that was a global thing, and not to like defend his position on it, but that was a commonly adopted thing amongst all of
I know, but okay, I could get that argument. Maybe I'm a little passionate here. I'm sorry. Sorry.
it's all good.
Sorry to interrupt, Eric. No disrespect. But because I hear it too. But like, if we're voting for a leader, right? Don't we want the qualities and characteristics of a leader? Someone that can stand up under pressure and make the right decisions, make the hard decisions. And I didn't see that from Trump at all. So I guess that's my only rebuttal to that. It's like, yeah, okay, fine. You want to give him a pass and stuff like that, I can understand. But to then, you know, say that unless he's shown amends, unless he's like, you know, I can't even figure out the words for this, but yeah, my point is that I just haven't seen anything from Trump where, you know, he's convinced me that he's learned any of the lessons in the past for me to put my trust in him again, that he wouldn't do that again if pressure came on him. I guess that's my
Listen to the Joe Rogan episode. I would say it built a bit of trust with me hearing him talk about some of that stuff.
Yeah, I'm guessing that's what I didn't hear it. So I'm guessing that's the difference here.
Well,
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
It's a personality thing too. Like I watched some documentary, and I think his dad taught him a lot of things. And one of the things that like this filmmaker like highlighted is that he will never admit to being wrong.
And it's a generational thing too, right? Like he was, you know, He reminds me so much of my grandpa, who was from New York. They talk the same way. Like my last memories of him, he was that age, would never admit when he was wrong, right? It's always about how great what he did it was. It's like a total, it's even Boomer. Is it older than Boomer? It's just like that generation thing.
Gotcha.
But his ability to serve his self-interest, I think, is the thing that I like the most about him. And if it wasn't for Bitcoin, I think maybe I'd have a more neutral or maybe, more aversion towards him. But I think he wants the credit more than anything. He's clearly very narcissistic. He wants to put his name on everything. I think, the fact that he wants to go down in the history books for being the guy who saved the country. We have an opportunity in front of us, in the States, to adopt Bitcoin as a treasury reserve asset, to start mining Bitcoin. And if he does that, he will get a lot of credit for doing something. That's the way he would, to truly make America great, would be to fully lean into the orange coin. Orange man leans into the orange coin.
Okay.
And I think there's the highest level of everything's probabilistic. So I think that he has the highest probability of doing something like that.
Okay, so we think about what's happening with the economy and what's going on and how we're steps away from recession, right? Or depression. Or everything's got to come down. If you were Trump's advisor, Eric Stacks, if you were the advisor, how would the transition be to go about from our fiat paradigm, this coming depression, to adopting Bitcoin as a treasury asset, to trying to mitigate, to try to, minimize pain, economic pain for people? What would the play be?
Oof, that's a good question.
That's a great question.
So
That's a perfect question for Eric Stacks.
there is something that comes to mind there, first off. But I think, I think he should lean into this idea that Elon has about downsizing the government efficiency program, or whatever you call it. Doge government.
The Doge, yeah. The Department of Government Efficiency.
Yes.
Doge. Yeah.
So clearly the government has been misallocating capital, and the money printer has been allowing them to do so for a long period of time. But if I were Trump's advisor, I would tell him that what they need to do is the government needs to start mining Bitcoin. The government needs to subsidize in whatever ways they can mining infrastructure. And I think they need to affect change monetary policy so that they start lending dollars into existence against Bitcoin. Because we have a debt-based fiat monetary system, and the monetary units are being lent into existence as debt against assets, real estate, equities, and T-bills. Those are all assets that are being debased, right? So this is what Jeff Booth talks a lot about. I'm really fascinated with Jeff Booth's work. We live in a deflationary world where we're producing more of everything, and the more technologically advanced we become, the faster we're producing things. And if we're lending fiat into existence as debt against some of those things, the more we produce them, or the faster we produce them, the more we're pushing down the value of those things in real terms. And if we have those assets collateralizing the debt, but we're debasing those assets at a progressively faster and faster and faster rate, then that means that we have to debase the currency faster and faster and faster to keep the system solvent, so that the nominal dollar value of the assets collateralizing the debt is higher than the debt amount. So if they stop printing dollars tomorrow, like a lot of Bitcoiners are like, I want fiat to just go away and be destroyed. Well, if they just turned off the fiat money printing system, the prices on things are going to start to drop really quickly. The debt will go insolvent, and dude, society will fucking collapse. It'll be Mad Max apocalyptic situation. But if they start lending, so if you could go to JP Morgan Chase and you could give them a Bitcoin out of however many Bitcoin you have, and you could start borrowing dollars against that Bitcoin like you could real estate, a few things happen. You get to now live off of that appreciation in a debt-based way, where you're not paying taxes on the debt because it's not income. And then the Bitcoin sits on the balance sheet of the financial institutions. And then it becomes a larger percentage of the assets on the balance sheet as other nation states and other pupusa, sellers and other people start joining that network. The appreciation is increasing. You have this great demonetization that's taking place, but it would become the only asset sitting on the balance sheet that's not being debased. If that's the case, the debasement of the currency required to keep the system solvent decreases. So I kind of visualize it in some way where at some point, I don't know, 150 years ago, 200 years ago, we detached from gold. We started to print more dollars than we had gold on reserve. And that became like a runaway train until in 1971, we completely detached. if they start lending dollars into existence as debt against Bitcoin, over time, I see it bringing us back to a one-to-one relationship between the layer 2, which could be the dollar, and the Bitcoin on reserve. The issue with fiat, the issue with fiat is that the assets that collateralizing the debt are being debased at a fast and faster rate. And in order to keep the system solvent, you have to increase the debasement. Keep up with that. And that's part of why I think the pandemic took place. Is because they needed to inject an enormous amount of money into the system to keep the system solvent. Because stocks, bonds, real estate, all of these things are fundamentally, in real terms, bleeding energy. We are debasing them every time. So if you built another, sub-development over here a couple blocks away, that's dilutive of the value of these. Of course, it matters how many people want those things, but you're increasing the supply. It's the elasticity of supplies. The demand goes up if the supply will always increase for everything except for Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the only thing that is the demand increases, the supply doesn't change. It's a programmatic, predetermined supply issuance, and once we hit 21 million, it's 21 million forever.
Let me ask you, does the fact that we are a debt-based monetary system and interest rates were at 0% for so long create the conditions for asset debasement? Because all of a sudden, I don't think, well, let's put it like this. I don't think a lot of these housing developments would exist if it wasn't for reckless lending.
Yeah, but I think it's a demand thing in addition to a need to keep the system solvent through the debasement of the currency. This is their thing. They need another vector to loan dollars into existence against. Like they need a reason to do it. So the government has clearly has a monetary issue, right? And how do they do that? They can either debase or they can tax. So you debase too much, you have an inflation issue. Then you got to slow the debasement down. And then they tax too much, you have an issue. And it's like this back and forth thing of debase, tax, debase, tax, debase, tax. And so the debasement, this is why I believe this is coming. I believe that you'll be able to go to a bank in the future and you'll be able to say, hey, it's like real estate, but it's better collateral. If you have $10 million worth of paid for real estate, you could go right into a bank. They need to debase, they have to continue to inject more monetary units into the system to keep it solvent. So they'll gladly give you a mortgage against that real estate. So you have paid for Bitcoin. It's pure equity. So if you give some of that Bitcoin to the system and get fiat in return, I know that some people would be very adverse to the idea of that because, like, why would you want to support the system? Why would you give?
Well, that's my question. So, like, do you see Bitcoin then creating an honest dollar system?
I think it kind of fixes fiat in a sense. It fixes the problem that we have with this runaway debasement at the same time that it's like destroying it and replacing it. Because gold needed a layer 2. It needed the dollar because of its physicality. It wasn't very portable. So you needed, I look at like the dollar as a layer 2 on top of gold. So due to the corruptible element of a centralized system, like a bank holding gold and it's some central bankers who are issuing the certificates that represent that gold, it didn't work. It failed us. And Bitcoin's incorruptibility built into the base layer and its ability through Lightning to be a global currency, I think it'll be an asset that starts to collateralize debt. It'll be a vector for them to debase the currency against. But over time, eventually, once we decrease the inflation, then at some point you won't need the dollar anymore. And so I think Satoshi, dude, the ultimate bailout that has happened in all of human history is when Satoshi created Bitcoin. The 2008 bailout was nothing. Satoshi really bailed out our civilization. We have this purely monetary instrument that is finite in supply. It's what we've essentially been looking for our entire civilization.
So do we need the dollar then just as a layer 2? And does it have to be the dollar?
I think we need it so today so that we don't go into an apocalyptic Mad Max situation. You can't just walk in and just flip a switch and turn fiat off. The whole world is just going to absolute mayhem.
Sure. It's like interwoven into almost everything. Economic transaction. So what is this, 100-year, 200-year process?
I don't know. I mean, I'm surprised at how fast things are happening. You know, sometimes I get in conversations, people will ask, like, when do you think hyper Bitcoinization is going to happen? I think it's fucking here. Like, I think it's here. 15 years ago, we didn't have this thing was just being released. And Now it's here.
Do you have any interest in the dollar besides you using it for practical reasons?
My interest in the dollar is in some sense the same as Bitcoin. Like, I don't want money. I want what money can get me.
Yeah.
And so what I want is the ability to save my economic energy or my surplus life force in a way that it can't be debased, confiscated, violated, etc. And so the dollar doesn't serve that purpose very well. And then, I'm being forced to use the dollar in the United States because it's the only thing that you can transact in without a taxable event. So, and my perspective, in a lot of ways I say this, I'm grading on a curve. Like, it's definitely not the perfect system by any means. It's been totally corrupted. It's caused a lot of problems in our world. But look at the civilization that we built on the technology of a yellow, shiny rock and a corrupt political currency unit system built on top of that. Like, that's pretty impressive if you think about it. And now we have a much better system. And I think that the existential crisis that we have built into the fiat paradigm is going to drive us into Bitcoin pretty quickly. And I think that the government needs Bitcoin. The government needs to mine Bitcoin for a multitude of reasons. And so I think that just the interest of the individual and then the compilation of individuals, the collective, like, we need this thing. And so I do think that we're coming out of an era of peak like deception and corruption. And so I think fuckery is expected. I think that a lot of gaslighting, dishonesty, like when Jamie Dimon got on CNBC and he's like, hey, when I think Satoshi could come back and double the supply. First thing I thought is this guy is flat out lying. Like, he can pronounce Satoshi's name and he knows that you can't double the supply of Bitcoin. Like, he's creating a bunch of FUD to artificially suppress the price so you can get a bunch of fiat maxis to go and buy more Apple stock and more T-bills and whatever, so that him and his homies can figure out how to contend with this like freedom grenade that just landed in everybody's laps.
You see how the BRICS nations just announced that a lot of them have Bitcoin mining operations?
Yeah,
Think about that
that's
today.
what I was talking about.
Dude,
I mentioned it earlier, but it wasn't in the context of
Yeah,
BRICS.
well, but it's interesting because BRICS is kind of going to be another fiat currency. But it sounds like there's almost tools in place with the Bitcoin mining by the individual nations to actually have that relationship with Bitcoin, like you're saying, Eric.
Yeah, I think the fact when Jason Lowry's book got pulled, like, I had like this, I don't know, got hit with this tsunami of excitement. I'm like, dude, this is happening. Like, really important, powerful people are waking up to this idea. Dude, if a bunch of plebs can figure this out, so can everybody else. Like, it's not rocket science. Greg Foss says it. It's 11th grade math. Like, it's not hard to figure this out. And if they're going to adopt a Bitcoin strategy, you can't just go out and tell everybody, hey, everybody, hey, we're working on adopting a Bitcoin strategy. It's like, they want the first mover advantage. They want to muddle the message. The fact that Gary G didn't come out a long time ago and say, all these altcoins are unregistered securities, the government's going to shut them down. I don't give a fuck if it takes 100 years. The fact that he hasn't done that tells me that they're diluting the value of Bitcoin so they can figure out how to deal with this thing.
Yeah.
So can I ask you,
Wait, real quick, while we're on the government term, do anyone follow Jameson Law?
oh, that was
A
an
little
interesting
bit.
post.
Yeah, how we're approaching this point a lot quicker than expected that Bitcoin's whatever SHA 256 encryption method is no longer quantum resistant. Or like, I'm not an encryption person, but basically he was saying how we now need to start figuring it out because quantum computing can crack the encryption methods of how we do Bitcoin.
Was that corroborated by anyone, or is that just kind of his thesis or theory that he's?
I think
putting out
that's part of his brand messaging anyway, but forever he said like, it's not here yet. It's not here yet. And now he's finally saying like, this needs to start being a conversation because it's happening faster than we thought.
Well, they'll just increase the encryption to 512 and then up and up and up.
But I don't know how big of a difference it makes when you're talking about quantum computing.
This is way out of my.
I mean, I don't know
expertise.
either. But
I don't
anyway,
know, but what I do know is that Satoshi's coins are sitting there as a honeypot for any computer hacker
Exactly.
or quantum computing system to figure out how to.
Well,
If those coins move, then I think we have an issue.
And that's the reason I bring it up, because it's like if you're a big government, a behemoth like the United States, you kind of want to make sure all that's figured out before you go all in, right?
So I'm not a quantum computing expert, but I have listened to, I don't know, endless Sailor conversations. And I believe, we're at what, 600 exahash I believe that if you took the computing power of every computing device on planet Earth outside of the ASICs, I think you have 300 or 400 exahash. So you couldn't effectively attack the network if you could harness the computing power of every single computing device, Amazon servers, Google servers,
Wow.
everything. So the infrastructure that's in place, like I think we've hit escape velocity. I don't think that this thing can be destroyed. But then there's the incentive too. This is where Bitcoin is this beautiful vortex of incentives. If you have the ability to compute that fast, why would you attack a network that pays you to support it? Like if you can quantum compute, you just start mining Bitcoin, you make more money. And here's the other thing too, is all of that computing power, if you mine a fraudulent block, it takes a trillionth of the energy for a node to just deny it. Say, actually, you know what, that's a false block. That's an illegitimate transaction. So the way that the network is designed, I think it's truly incorruptible.
That was
Did you
always
read that article, by the way?
his post about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I glanced through it. Once again, a lot of it's over my head, but the
Yeah.
takeaway I got.
So going back to the dollar conversation, I'm curious if you could just transact in Bitcoin and live your life in Bitcoin and have all your needs met,
Absolutely.
would you circumvent the dollar?
Totally.
Okay.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, but currently, and this is where I feel like because of Bitcoin, we're moving in the right direction. I would definitely like to get 100 miles or 100 years down the road into a post-fiat era, but we're here now. This is the world that we live in now. So if I could save in Bitcoin, that's better than not being able to save in Bitcoin. The fact that Bitcoin exists, it's better than, I'd rather have Bitcoin that I could save in and can't transact in without a taxable event than have no Bitcoin. So yeah, I'm definitely no fiat maxi by any means. Like I have to, I have a major problem.
We
with all
weren't
of
sure,
the-
Eric. We weren't sure.
But think about it. The
Well-
ultimate trick fuck took place when they started to lend dollars into existence as debt against assets. When they could print money limitlessly and through fractional reserve banking, get you to give them real assets in exchange for dollars that they print out of thin air. Like we created a real problem, and it's creating a feedback loop because the assets that collateralize the debt are losing value in real terms. And you could see that if you measure the value of things in Bitcoin. Now that we have this fixed unit, you can see the value of everything going down. It's creating an optical illusion when you have a house that you bought for $400,000 and 4 years later it's worth $800,000 or $600,000. The house isn't actually worth more. It's only worth more in dollar terms. So like everyone knows, it's common knowledge. You go buy I got a diesel pickup truck. You go buy a diesel pickup truck or any vehicle, you go buy a car, it's considered to be a depreciating item, a depreciating asset. It's going down in value, right? But what are you measuring the value of that vehicle in? You're measuring the value of a car in dollars. You're measuring the value of a house in dollars. The dollar, so as the value of the house is increasing relative to the dollars, what's happening? That gap is getting bigger. Is the house going up in value or is the dollar going down in value? What's really happening is the house is going down in value, but the dollar is going down in value so much faster that it's giving you this false perception that you're getting wealthier, but you're getting wealthier in dollar terms.
It's going to be interesting. Okay, pulling on that thread, then, all these people that think they got, all this money in housing, and, a lot of it is speculation. A lot of it is also using housing as a savings vehicle, right? As a way to grow your money, but really you're just absorbing the inflation. And at the same time, they're developing all these houses, right? So they're increasing the supply. And so to me, the question that came up while you were explaining all that is, man, what happens when it corrects? What happens when Bitcoin starts absorbing all of that? And then it's like the rug getting pulled or the curtain being open and just realizing that, oh, wow, there's all these houses out there. And I thought the whole time that my house was worth this much. And now Bitcoin's eating all of that, all of that capital up. Or because the monetary premium is being sucked up by Bitcoin. And what happens to people's life savings?
So I don't think we're going to have some big crash that everybody's been, not everybody, but some people talk about. Real estate cannot crash in value because it's collateralizing debt. they'll have to continue to debase the currency. There's going to be some sort of other reason, man. It could be a war, it could be a world war. Okay, so we have this world war.
Well,
we need to continue to debase the currency at hyper rate. Now it's for national security, but everyone's going to have to deal with this 20% inflation rate. You cannot have a 20%, 30% correction in the housing market.
Okay. Wow. I don't know about that.
I just don't think it's possible. I think that they would immediately drop interest rates to continue to get people to borrow, which is going to be through fractional reserve lending, more debasement of the currency to keep the.
So they're gonna try to stimulate demand for housing with whatever, printing money.
It'd be artificial stimulation because they're going to continue to lend more dollars into existence.
It's definitely crashing then, at least in Bitcoin terms.
Definitely. Oh yeah. Yeah, but I don't think you could have a real stock market, like an epic 1929 stock market.
Well, what about
or
a 2008?
crash. I think that we were on the precipice of something like that when COVID happened.
For sure, 100%. And I saw that coming a while.
But instead of a real estate crash, we had a virus that you had to go take a test to even know if you had. And then they debased the currency, they doubled the money supply.
So how do they convince Trump to sign a $6.2 trillion bill then to like bail everything out?
I think he wants to keep the system going.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, public
it's
perception of himself. Like you're saying.
But here's the other issue too, though. So if you could like personify, a banking system, if real estate collapses in value, then a bunch of people are just going to stop paying their mortgages, and your mortgage-backed securities and what you have sitting on the balance sheet becomes worthless. The thing goes out of business. You're done. So that's also why I believe that they're going to start lending fiat into existence as debt against Bitcoin.
Does Bitcoin?
It's supreme collateral, because if somebody defaults on their mortgage, you can only sell to the house to somebody who wants to buy a house in that area who's capable of buying that house.
Mm-hmm.
But if somebody borrows money against Bitcoin and they get hooked on fentanyl or whatever it is, and they ruin their life and they can't service that debt, you could sell the Bitcoin 24/7, 365 to anybody in the world. Much better collateral.
Yeah. What happens when the world wakes up to the scam, right? What happens when they wake up and realize, oh, the housing market is artificially propped up, right? And like Bitcoin is a big mirror to reveal this scam. I don't know. I still see the potential.
It doesn't happen overnight, right?
I don't think it happens overnight. And I'm curious too what that transition looks like. Is it a one big violent crash and then a recovery and then a slow realization that, hey,
I don't think it's a big violent crash. What if tomorrow Trump says, hey, you know what? We're going to go ahead and we're going to get rid of capital gains taxes on Bitcoin. I want everybody to go buy Bitcoin and start selling down your real estate. There's not enough buyers for the house. If everybody woke up tomorrow and just literally, if you could orange pill the world, you could take the fluoride out of the water and you could dilute orange pills into the water system globally. Everybody wakes up tomorrow and has downloaded all this information. Is like, holy shit, I'm holding all these defective assets. I don't want to sell them all and buy Bitcoin.
Yes.
Who's going to fucking buy them?
The assets?
All the stuff.
Yeah, there's still speculators out there. That's why I think that
you can't have that mass migration. I think that entropy, there's an element of entropy will prevent that move from happening too fast.
Okay.
I don't know.
I'm not convinced.
I'm hopeful.
I'm really interested in
did you see 10-15% drawdowns?
Yeah, I suppose. But once again, though, then houses start to go into foreclosure, and then the banking system is going to go to the government. The Federal Reserve is going to lower the interest rate. They're going to continue to lend money.
But the thing is, I don't think they can just do that without, creating ripple effects, which I think they're more aware of.
That's
now.
Inflation. That's you going and paying $20 a gallon for gas.
Yes. And I don't know if they're willing to, save the housing market for that type of trade-off.
I don't know about that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's housing and equities can't go down that much.
So they'll throw the American citizen under the bus.
They've been doing it
before they let any of these systems crash.
And that's the unethical element to the Cantillon effect, because the property owning class is winning at the expense of the non-property owning class. They're getting wealthier at the expense of the people who don't own those assets.
Mm-hmm. You don't got to convince me. I'm just, and I think what you're saying is very Probable. You know.
Let me ask you a question. If JP Morgan Chase says, hey, I'll loan you 50% LTV dollars against your Bitcoin, would you go borrow some money against your Bitcoin and wait until Bitcoin is $1 million to pay that debt off? Or would you rather sell the
It
asset?
depends. Can I service the debt? If it is, what's the interest rate? Like Michael Saylor's borrowing money at what? I don't know. 0.0.
He's issuing convertible bonds. I mean, he's doing some interesting things there. But if you could just go and get a B lock, let's say you own a bunch of real estate, you can go and get a HELOC.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you can get a B lock against your Bitcoin and it's 3%. And you could then sell down small portions of your Bitcoin to
At
service
this point,
that debt.
I think at this point, yeah.
Yeah.
At this stage in Bitcoin's maturity, if there was a 3% B-lock loan, I'd definitely do that and buy a house.
So-
Something like that, you know, like a property.
So Bitcoin's the only ethical investment. And I also think that interfacing, gosh, this is controversial. Some Bitcoin maxis might hate on me for saying this, but I think that interfacing.
That's what we do here.
Commingling Bitcoin or the Bitcoin entering into the traditional financial system, it will have positive effects on the traditional financial system, the fiat world. If you borrowed money against your Bitcoin from JP Morgan Chase, you're going to have to give them the Bitcoin. They're going to issue you the fiat. Now, if the Bitcoin is appreciating fast enough, let's say you could take 10% of your stack and you could lend it to, or you could give the 10% of your stack to JP Morgan Chase and you could borrow fiat against it. As it appreciates, you can continue to up the amount of debt that you have relative to that Bitcoin. You could essentially live the rest of your life off the dollar denominated appreciation.
Yes.
Now that Bitcoin is sitting on the balance sheet of the financial institutions, it's the only asset on the balance sheet that's not bleeding energy. So the debasement required to keep that system solvent decreases.
Okay.
So in some sense, you're supporting in the system.
Yeah.
You're bringing solvency into the system.
So that would be one of my biggest pet peeves right there is giving my Bitcoin to JP Morgan, right? Because then, you know, you're collateralizing JP Morgan, right? You're lending JP Morgan your Bitcoin.
And they're giving you dollars out of thin air.
Yes.
For sure. But the dollars that they have to continue to print over time, the problem that we have now is that the debasement, it's exponential debasement required to keep the system solvent. And as they debase the currency more, the debasement required to keep the system solvent increases because they're lending money into existence against debt against assets that are being debased. So the government keeps issuing T-bills. The Federal Reserve prints money out of thin air, buys them. You go and build a bunch of houses. Let's say you inherit, I don't know, $100 million, paid for, something gold, something. And then you inherit that money. You go and build a bunch of real estate. You build a bunch of real estate. You have this paid for real estate portfolio. You go to JP Morgan Chase and you say, hey, I want to borrow a bunch of money against a bunch of currency against this paid for real estate. They put that real estate on the balance sheet to collateralize the debt. But the real estate is really a shitty asset to collateralize debt because more people are building real estate. If there's more demand for real estate, if everybody tomorrow wakes up and starts having, an epic amount of children, we're going to need more housing. We're going to make more houses. As you do that, you're debasing the asset that's collateralizing the debt. And in order to keep the system solvent and not be upside down, the debasement required to do so increases. But if the asset that's collateralizing the debt can't be debased, then the debasement of the currency to keep the system solvent decreases.
Gotcha. Sort of.
Yeah.
That's it's interesting because when you go into these explanations, I could tell you're so thorough and you've thought through a lot of how this is all going to play out and the domino effects. And then you have this ability to just lay it out there. But for, someone else, it's like, okay, you got to jump here and there, and then you got to go there. And I'm like, oh, okay, I think I'm following. But it's for someone who's unfamiliar with the system, the fiat system and the whole lending markets and stuff like that might be a little tough.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's some blind spots with that. I'm just a dude. I'm a 15-year career cannabis farmer who's, you know, in Bitcoin because I don't want to be lied to, stolen from, poisoned, gaslit, whatever. I don't want to be poor, you know. So I've had a you know, an incentive to learn what's happening economically.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think about it through the lens of like Jeff Booth's teaching. We live in a deflationary world. We're producing more of everything. And we're doing so more efficiently. And so in the fiat system, prices have to continue to go up on things. Otherwise, the system goes insolvent. And a lot of people want to see that happen. I would like to see us transition in a peaceful, smooth way into the new world, the new Bitcoin world. And if you just, like I said, if you just turn fiat off, if they stop printing dollars tomorrow, the value of all of the equities and the real estate, everything that's collateralizing the debt will start to plummet. The debt goes insolvent. I mean, it's already insolvent, but people stop servicing the debt. Then who's going to, you know, there is a function for the government and police and whatnot because they're protecting the state and chain of custody of property rights. If fiat collapsed tomorrow and the government went out of business tomorrow, the guy who's going to own your house is going to be the guy on the block that has the most guns. The sociopath who doesn't give a fuck, who's going to walk into your house and be like, this is mine now, will own your house. So there is a system in place that has been doing positive things, although the underlying fundamentals of how the monetary system works has been bifurcating our society, and it is a theft mechanism that allows the government to misallocate capital and pay for things that otherwise people don't want to pay for. That's all a problem. But the intention and the idea of a lot of the fundamentals, I think, are good things. I think that you need, like, if we had anarcho-capitalism and everything just
kind of similar to, sorry to interrupt, but it's kind of similar to here in El Salvador, right? It's like, okay, the government actually functions in a way that uplifts the people, and there isn't this underlining corrosive mechanism that's, you know, running it all.
Totally. You need to take off.
I don't want to interrupt the flow, but I gotta go do some.
I think it's a good point. I think that the moral of the story is buy Bitcoin. Yeah, we're going to the moon. Eric, man, thank you so much for coming by. You're here in El Salvador. Dude. I'm sure you'll be here much more often.
Yes, I'll be a little better rested, and we can further unpack this thought because I do think that there's something there. And I've listened to an immense amount of Jeff Booth. I've had the privilege of having several conversations with him. You know, I think. Yeah, most people do. When I first listened to Jeff Booth talk about how, you know, deflation is the natural state of a free market, pause, hold on. Let me like wire new neurological pathways here. Like, it's really hard to see it because we fall subject to the optical illusion of dollar denominated asset appreciation. You're like, oh, people are getting wealthier. But in real terms, like I saw a chart, a Swan, I think it was in Prague. Swan, he's out. Swan did one of their episodes, they had a chart, and essentially it was the S&P over the last 100 years. And if you look at the S&P price chart over the last 100 years, it's a hockey stick, up to the right. But if you adjust for the change in M2, you complete the algebraic equation, how many monetary units are in the system, it's actually going down 1 or 2% a year. So there's this optical illusion of like people getting wealthier. You're getting wealthier in dollar terms.
Sorry, my dog just walked in. So you're getting wealthier in dollar terms.
Yeah, but so you can't see the fact that we live in a fundamentally deflationary world.
Sure.
Free markets are deflationary. Prices will fall to the marginal cost of production. And if you have assets that we are debasing, collateralizing debt, then the debasement has to continue to increase or the debt has to go insolvent, one of the two. And if the debt goes insolvent, we go into a Mad Max apocalyptic situation. You got total, you know, anarcho, whatever. You got it, you know, it's total mayhem. What would happen is you would end up forming jurisdictions or areas where people would band together, and then they would elect groups of individuals or individuals that they trust. They would come up with policies, rules, whatever, so that you can't put, I don't know, big old poles and security cameras right in somebody's view or whatever it is, right? And you need schools, you need clean waters, you need all of these things. And so I mentioned the cameras because we were just talking about, you know, somebody just put a camera out back and it's obstructing the view.
Yeah.
But anyways, people would form groups of individuals that would be elected by the local jurisdiction or the populace within that area. They would then vote on rule sets. They would then pay into a pool, a pot, that then they would allow those individuals to, you know, allocate that capital towards the things that the society needs. So you would end right back up into a situation where you would have a governing body. The problem is that the government has been able to fund things that the people don't want through the debasement of the currency. So the government is not truly beholden to the preferences of its citizens if it can arbitrarily print money to fund things. So if you could remove that, then the government is really going to be, because it is a business. And if the people that they're doing business with don't want what they want to do, then it's not going to work. So I think that we would end up in a situation where you got government anyways. No matter what, you're going to have some sort of governing
100%.
body.
I think that's the conclusion I've come to too after being here in El Salvador too. It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, it's the natural order of things. There's got to be a hierarchy. There's got to be a manager, a manager to society. Like and unless society is on a smaller scale and you have other systems that coordinate the coordinate the functions. But on a large scale, even like the size of El Salvador, you need a government. And so it's one of the conclusions I've came to, kind of moving from my libertarian, kind of more anarchist like thought process. It's like, this is the natural order of things in a human society.
Yeah.
Now, I think the difference is, it's a service provider. I kind of see government now as a service provider. And so some service providers are better than others. And it's kind of like choose wisely.
Yeah. I think the free market takes care of things. Incentives in the free market take care of things. If you had a populace that needed something and it wasn't there, and there's enough demand and not enough supply, people will bid the price up and someone will solve that problem. There's an economic incentive to do so. And so that's the problem. That's elasticity of supply. And that's the problem with the fiat system is as supply satiates demand, the value of whatever good or service will decrease. And so that's what's special with Bitcoin is the productivity gains within our civilization flow to everybody within that network. But in the fiat world, the productivity gains are being extracted. So like GDP, I don't know what GDP is measured at today, but GDP should really be a negative number because we're getting more efficient. If you measure it in fiat, it's a positive number. But in Bitcoin terms, it's a negative number. Every year that the purchasing power in Bitcoin and whatever the fixed monetary unit is, and in this case, it's going to be Bitcoin, is going to increase relative to the goods and services because the Bitcoin's not increasing in supply, but the goods and services are. And the more technologically advanced we become, the faster we're increasing the supply of the goods and services. So, we grow up thinking that we elect politicians or we elect individuals to go into the government, and then we pool capital together through paying taxes, and we then vote on what they do with that capital. And then as we become more efficient, prices should be going down on things. We should be living more abundantly. Like, I don't know about you, but I remember several conversations when I'm a kid, like, hey, and when we get into the 2020s, we're gonna have like flying cars and we'll be able to like just zap things into existence and all this stuff. We're becoming more technologically advanced, but only a few people have access to that technology. The quality of life is getting better in some sense, but it should be significantly better.
And it's getting better for a few.
Totally.
But yeah, across the board too, but not necessarily in a fulfilling way. Like everybody can eat, everybody has access to food. It's just not the most healthiest quality food, right?
Totally.
And so it depends on how you measure standard of living. But for some people, I think it's going up, and for others, it's kind of like being diluted.
Well, that's the problem with fiat, is creating a have not have yachts world.
Yeah, interesting.
Because the people who own the assets are getting to borrow against the dollar denominated value of those assets, and they get to go then buy more assets. It's the Cantillon feedback loop. And so then the non-asset owning class doesn't have access to that. And then that's where you get these crazy ideas of like, we need unrealized capital gains taxes, because the have-nots are like, yo, I want to solve this problem. The problem isn't that we need to confiscate the property of the wealthy people. We need to stop increasing the dollar denominated value of their assets through debasing the shit out of the currency.
Yeah.
And if that,
but then, okay. So just to play devil's advocate here, but then that, as you mentioned, destroys the system. You have to debase the currency for the system to survive.
Totally.
So where's the solution? The solution comes as in Bitcoin.
They need to lend money into existence as debt against Bitcoin.
Interesting.
That's what I think. And then in some sense, it's, here's the other thing too. If you borrow money because I don't think fiat is money. I think Bitcoin is the first money our civilization has really had. But if you borrow currency against your Bitcoin, you have the option of buying the Bitcoin back later. Everybody would do that, even the most hardened Bitcoiners. The people who were like, fuck the system, I'll never fuck it. I'm done using fiat. You're gonna tell me you wouldn't borrow at 3%? You're gonna sell your Bitcoin if you couldn't borrow at 3%?
Let's have a thought experiment then. And we got to wrap this up soon. But like, let's say again that JP Morgan says, okay, we're gonna lend dollars. We're gonna take in your Bitcoin and we're gonna lend you dollars against it. What's the interest rate? What do you think the interest rate is?
I don't know. I guess it would, but once again, the marginal cost, prices fall to the marginal cost of production. And if the marginal cost of production for fiat is 0, then you're going to have the free market is going to compete, and you're going to have interest rates decrease. Well,
because right now, right, like lenders of fiat, like these markets, lending markets, right?
Yeah.
The players in them, they're charging somewhere around 15%.
Yes, I think what they're doing is they're taking capital from people who don't understand Bitcoin, because if they understood Bitcoin, they'd be trying to buy Bitcoin, not capture 10% yield on their dollars.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that like some of these Bitcoin lending companies are getting investment from investors, and then they're lending that money out against the Bitcoin. They're holding the Bitcoin as some sort of multi-sig. They're, charging 12%, 15%. They're taking 2 or 5% or whatever, and then they're giving 10% to the investors. No financial institution that can print money is lending against Bitcoin right now. It's all private money,
man.
At least from my understanding.
So then, once major institutions start lending against Bitcoin, we could start to see that interest rate start dropping as more sophisticated players come into the market and realize the significance of this asset and kind of start pricing.
Yeah, because
correctly.
if you're JP Morgan Chase, don't you want Bitcoin on the balance sheet?
Mm-hmm.
If you can print money out of thin air, if the monetary policy is such, if
last question on this. Sorry.
Yeah.
Do you think multi-sig plays a role in all this?
I do. I think multi-sig is going to be the way that the custodians. So I think in our currently regulated system, the custodians are going to have to be different than the brokers.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't really know how that's at least how the ETFs work. And so that's another thing too. When Bank of NY Mellon got approved to hold Bitcoin for the ETFs, first thing I thought is dang, we don't need Coinbase anymore. I don't think Larry Fink wakes up in the morning and he's happy that some wildcat crypto casino is holding all these coins on behalf of the ETF. But I think, clearly Coinbase has some sort of sophisticated multi-sig. I think that they have keys and Swiss vaults and whatnot distributed all over the world. I don't know the details around that, but yeah, so I think multi-sig does play a significant role in that for sure. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I think that's a good point to leave it off. Eric, dude, thank you. We'll see you around. Welcome to El Salvador.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And adopting Bitcoin's coming up.
Yep.
You'll be there.
Yep.
I'll be there. Ladies and gentlemen, get your privileged access pass to come hang out with us. And besides that, have a